Hey everyone, Pylaris here. In this video, I'll be going over how monster patience meters and reset mechanics work. You want to be comfortable with monster patience so that you can maximize your kite distance without worrying about resetting the camps. It's also important to understand the reset systems for neutral objectives, as the reset mechanics on Dragon, Herald, and Baron are quite different. To begin with, let's talk about the regular monster camps. Every monster has a set tether radius centered around the camp's initial spawn location. This tether radius doesn't interact with where the monster is standing, but rather where you, the monster's target, are standing. If you're standing inside the radius, the monster won't lose patience. If you're standing outside the radius, the monster will lose patience at a set rate of decay. All monster camps have the same amount of patience and rate of decay. They each have 7 ticks of patience, and it'll take about 4 seconds to tick from full patience down to 0, at which point the camp will reset. Now, with regards to the tether radius of each monster, a common misunderstanding is that you can basically just draw a circle around each monster, and that's its rough patience range. However, the patience limits aren't decided by direct point-to-point distance, but rather by walking distance. So for example, if you're only 200 units away from blue, but you're on the other side of the wall, you're going to be outside of its patience radius. Where this tends to factor in and mess players up is on camps like Krugs, that are directly next to wall bends. These small wall bends prevent direct lines of movement, so they reduce the effective patience radius when kiting in that direction. In the video description below, you can find a document containing screenshots of the exact patience limits of each monster camp. Now let's talk about exceptions to these rules. The first exception is when a monster's aggro is being juggled. Monsters will always target the closest champion that is actively hitting them. They lose a tick of patience each time their target changes, so you need to be a bit careful of this when you're being leashed by melee champions. Monsters can retarget multiple times in each auto attack cycle, so if there's too much wiggling back and forth, they can reset very quickly. The second exception is when a monster is hard CC'd. Even if the monster's target is standing outside of its patience limit, a monster won't lose patience while it's being CC'd by something like a stun or a fear. The final exception is the Krugs camp. The Krugs are a bit more complicated than the other camps due to their splits. The first thing to be aware of is that patience decay does not carry over to post-split Krugs. If the big Krug dies with 1 tick of patience remaining, the medium Krugs that spawn from it will still have full patience bars. Keep in mind, the point around which their patience radii are centered is not where they spawned, but rather the original point at the center of the Krugs pit. However, something to be careful of is that whereas the initial big and medium Krug share the exact same patience radius, the post-split Krugs have slightly offset patience ranges. Their overall patience range is a little bit smaller, maybe by 100 units or so, and the central point is slightly offset in the direction of the Krug that they spawned from. If their original spawn was the big Krug, the point will be offset towards the big Krug side of the pit, and if their original spawn was the medium Krug, their point will be slightly offset towards the medium Krug side of the pit. Because of this messy difference in patience ranges, I recommend just playing it really safe with post-split Krugs. Don't try to kite them very far until they're very low on HP, it's just not worth the risk of resetting the camp. Of course, once a medium Krug is low on health, feel free to kite it as far as you want, because as soon as it dies in splits, the small Krug spawns will have fresh patience timers to work with. Now, before I move on to neutral objectives, I want to briefly touch on my recommendations for learning to handle patience properly. When you're practicing the kite for maximum distance, I recommend stopping at the edge of patience range and only pulling monsters further when you're confident you can kill them within the next 4 seconds. Something you'll often see high ELO junglers do is allow the non-buff camps to die to the jungle item's damage over time while running to the next camp. The jungle items tick for a set amount of damage, about once per second, so if you want to make sure a camp will die to the damage over time before resetting, just click the camp while you're clearing it. This will bring up its HP bar in the top left corner of your screen, and you can check its exact HP. Generally speaking in the early game, if a non-buff monster is at full patience, and your last spell or attack left the monster with under 40 HP, it'll be safe to just run for your next camp. This is because the jungle item ticks for roughly 10 damage in the early game, and the full patience meter allows for at least 4 ticks to pass. This HP threshold scales up throughout the game as your jungle item's damage over time increases. Now let's move on to the neutral objectives. To begin with, Baron is by far the simplest one. It has no patience meter and no target juggling mechanics. Simply put, if it has no valid target within a set radius, it'll start to regenerate HP immediately. So if your team is trying to take Baron while also zoning out the enemy team, try to make sure at least one champion stays within this radius. Rift Herald is pretty similar to normal monster camps. It has a set patience radius, a white patience bar above its head, and it works off the exact same system that regular camps do. The only difference is that instead of a 7-tick patience bar, the Rift Herald has a 10-tick patience bar, which takes about 6 seconds to fully deplete if its target is not within its radius. Now, Dragon works completely differently from every other camp. Not only does it lack a traditional patience meter, it also has not one, but 2 different reset ranges. There is an outer radius in a perfect circle around the dragon. If there is a target inside this ring, the dragon will pull over to hit the closest one. If it has no targets remaining within the ring, the dragon will immediately reset. There is no gradual tick down of patience. However, just because you're standing inside of this larger reset ring and the dragon is chasing you, does not mean it will reset. It also has a second inner reset ring based on its own location. The dragon will never pull past this ring, and it'll immediately reset if it ever reaches this border. Lastly, there's target juggling. The dragon will always target the nearest possible champion. If it's forced to change targets too many times, there is an invisible patience meter that ticks down, causing the dragon to reset once it hits 0. Just like Rift Herald, this invisible meter has 10 ticks in total. This means a dragon can change aggro a total of 10 times, and on the 10th time, it'll immediately reset. Keep in mind, changing aggro does not mean it actually changed the target that it hit 10 times. Target selection occurs multiple times per auto attack cycle, so if there's too much wiggling involved, a dragon can reset within just a few auto attacks. In the description below, you can find a link to a document containing screenshots of the exact reset ranges of each neutral objective, as well as a few other useful resources. That about covers it for this video. If you'd like to see more content like this, feel free to comment and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.